I was folding laundry in the hallway when it happened. Not a dramatic moment, not a scene from a movie. Just a Tuesday afternoon in October, the kind where the light comes through the window at that low autumn angle and makes everything look a little more golden than it really is. I had a small pile of my grandson's clothes on my lap. Little socks, a tiny striped shirt, and I was humming to myself, thinking about nothing in particular. That was the last peaceful moment I remember for a long time. My daughter-in-law came around the corner so fast I didn't even hear her footsteps. She stopped when she saw me, and her face changed. It was like watching a cloud pass over the sun. 1 second, normal. The next second, something cold and sharp. "What are you doing with those?" I looked up. "Just folding. I thought I'd help with the—" She crossed the room in 3 steps, grabbed the clothes right out of my hands, and dropped them on the floor. Not set them down. Dropped them, like they were contaminated. "I don't need your help," she said. "And I don't want you touching his things. Do you understand me? Don't ever go through my son's belongings." I sat there with my empty hands in my lap. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. I was 67 years old, sitting in the hallway of what I believed, foolishly, I now understand, was also my home, and my daughter-in-law was staring at me like I had done something criminal. From the living room, I could hear the television, a sports commentator's voice, rising and falling. My son was 20 feet away. He didn't come in. He didn't say a word. I want to tell you how I got there, because that part matters. It matters because I made choices that felt right at the time, and I need you to understand how a sensible woman can end up somewhere completely wrong. My husband Gerald passed in the spring of the year before. 41 years we were married. He handled everything, the bills, the accounts, the investments. Not because I was helpless, but because that was simply how we divided things. I taught third grade for 28 years. I handled the children, the household, the cooking. He handled the money. It worked. It worked for 4 decades. When he died, I discovered 2 things. The first was that I loved him more than I had even known while he was alive, which is one of those terrible gifts that grief gives you. The second was that I had almost no idea what our financial situation actually looked like. There was a will. We had a lawyer, a man named Mr. Patton, who had handled Gerald's business for years, and he walked me through everything carefully. Gerald had been thorough. There was a life insurance policy, $95,000. There was our house, fully paid off, valued around $280,000. There was a small savings account, and his pension survivor benefits, which would give me just over $400 a month. I could have stayed. The house was mine. The money was enough if I was careful. But here is the thing about grief that nobody warns you about. It makes the familiar unbearable. Every room in that house had Gerald in it, his reading chair, the coffee mug he always left on the second shelf, the dent in the mattress on his side. I would wake up at 3 in the morning and the silence was so loud I thought I was losing my mind. My son Philip called every Sunday. He and his wife Renee lived about 4 hours away in Columbus. They had 1 child, my grandson Oliver, who was 3 years old, and the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. Philip said, "Mom, you shouldn't be alone in that house." He said it kindly. He said it like he meant it. We talked about it over several months. The arrangement we landed on was this. I would sell the house, and I would contribute $150,000 toward a larger home that Philip and Renee would buy in a nicer school district. The remaining money, $130,000 after closing costs and moving expenses, I deposited into a joint account that Philip and I both had access to, with the understanding that it was my emergency fund and retirement cushion. My pension would cover my personal expenses. I want to be clear about this because I've had a lot of time to think about it, and the arrangement on paper was not unreasonable. I wasn't giving away my money. I wasn't naive. I thought I was investing in proximity to my family. I thought I was buying myself soft landings. I moved in on a Saturday in July. Philip carried boxes. Oliver ran around my ankles and called me Grandma Bea, which was his version of my name, Beatrice. And it made me laugh every single time. For about 3 weeks, everything was fine. Then it wasn't. It started small the way these things always do. Renee mentioned that I had reorganized the spice cabinet without asking. I apologized. She mentioned that I had let Oliver watch television for 40 minutes while she was napping, which was 20 minutes more than his allowed screen time. I apologized for that too. She mentioned that I had used the good towels in the guest bathroom, which, apparently were not for daily use. I kept apologizing. I kept adjusting. I told myself this was her home, and I needed to respect her routines. And that was true. It was true. But there is a difference between respecting someone's routines and being made to feel like a stranger in every room you enter. And Renee crossed that line so gradually that I didn't notice until I was deep on the other side of it. By September, I had stopped going into the kitchen unless I was specifically invited. I ate when meals were offered to me. I stayed in my room most of the day. I could hear Oliver playing downstairs, and I would sit at the edge of my bed and listen and feel something hollowing out inside my chest. Philip noticed. I know he noticed because I saw him watching me sometimes, his face doing something complicated that he never let turn into words. He loved his wife. He loved his son. He loved me. He had built himself a life that required everyone to be fine, and so everyone was fine officially, and the reality of what was happening in that house was simply not something he could afford to look at directly. That Tuesday in October, after Renee dropped my grandson's laundry on the floor and walked away, I sat in the hallway for a long time. Then I went upstairs and called my old friend Claudette, who I had known since we were both young mothers in the same neighborhood back in Cincinnati. Claudette has never once in 50 years told me what I wanted to hear. That is why I called her. "Bae," she said when I finished telling her. "Baby, you know what you need to do." "I know," I said. "How much money do you have access to right now?" That was when I discovered the second terrible thing. I logged into the joint account. I had checked it when I moved in, and there had been $128,000 in it. Now there was $11,400,000. I sat on my bed and I looked at that number for a very long time. When Philip came home that evening, I asked him about it quietly. In the kitchen, just the two of us. He got a look on his face that I had never seen before. Not guilt, exactly, but something adjacent to it. He said there had been some unexpected expenses with the new house. He said he had meant to tell me. He said the money was technically both of ours, and he thought I understood that it was going toward the household. "Philip," I said, "that was my retirement savings." He said he would pay me back. He said it like he believed it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, and I did the math over and over, and every version of the math came out the same way. I was 67 years old. I had $11,400 in accessible funds. I had $1,400 a month in pension income. I was living in a house where I was not welcome, dependent on a son who had spent my money without asking, married to a woman who had just thrown laundry on the floor to make a point about my place in the household hierarchy. I stayed for 3 more weeks. I am not proud of that, but I want to be honest about it. I stayed because I was scared, and because every morning I woke up and told myself today things would be different, and because Oliver would climb into my lap after breakfast and put his small warm head against my shoulder, and I could not make myself leave him. The thing that finally moved me was not another confrontation with Renee. It was something quieter and worse. I was sitting with Oliver in the living room one afternoon, reading him a picture book, and Renee came in and picked him up mid-sentence. Not urgently, not for any reason. She just took him and walked into the other room, and Oliver looked back at me over her shoulder with his big brown eyes, confused. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The message was completely clear. I called a cab the next morning while everyone was asleep. I packed 4 bags. My clothes, my documents, my medications, the small wooden jewelry box Gerald had given me for our 20th anniversary, and 3 photographs. I left a note on the kitchen table for Philip that said, "I love you. I'll be in touch when I'm settled." I had nowhere to go. I will tell you something that I have never told anyone except Claudette. I sat in Goodale Park for almost 2 hours that morning, just sat on a bench with my bags around me. It was a cold morning, not freezing, but cold enough that I had my coat buttoned all the way up. A man walked by with a golden retriever. A young woman ran past with earbuds in. Nobody looked at me. Nobody saw me. I had $11,400 and a pension check coming in 12 days and no idea what happened next. I thought about Gerald. I thought about the way he used to reach over in the middle of the night, not quite awake, and put his hand on my arm, just to know I was there. I thought about how I used to find that habit mildly annoying, and how I would give every remaining year of my life to feel it one more time. Then I stopped thinking about Gerald because I couldn't afford to. Not right then. I needed to think about what was in front of me. I called Claudette back. She wired me $3,000 that afternoon. Alone, she said, firmly, because Claudette knows me well enough to know that I won't take a gift, and I checked into an extended stay hotel near downtown Columbus. It was clean and plain and cost $62 a night, which I knew I could not sustain, but it gave me a week to think. The second call I made was to Mr. Patton, Gerald's lawyer. I had a question for him, something that had been sitting in the back of my mind since the day he walked me through the will. Gerald had mentioned once, years ago, a property in Dayton, a small duplex he had inherited from his uncle and rented out for extra income. I had never thought much about it. It was Gerald's business. When I asked Mr. Patton about it, there was a pause. Mrs. Meist, Hartwell, he said, that property is in both your names. It was always in both your names. Didn't you receive the paperwork? The paperwork had gone to our home address, to the house I had sold. I had signed a stack of documents at closing and moving and in the fog of grief, and I had not read every page of every one of them. The duplex in Dayton was mine. Both units were currently rented. A young couple on one side, an older gentleman on the other, bringing in $1,950 a month in rental income. The property itself, Mr. Patton told me, had recently been appraised at $310,000. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, and I pressed my hand flat against the polyester comforter, and I made myself breathe. I was not destitute. I was not helpless. I was, in fact, a woman who owned a property worth more than $300,000 and had simply not known it. What happened next took about 4 months, and I will not pretend it was easy or clean. I hired a property management company to handle the Dayton duplex, which freed me from the day-to-day while I sorted out my life. With the rental income added to my pension, I had $3,350 a month coming in, enough to live on carefully, enough to rent a small one-bedroom apartment in Cincinnati, close to the neighborhood where I'd raised Philip, close to the community I still knew. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on Quatman Avenue, and it had a window in the kitchen that caught the morning light. And on the first day I moved in, I stood in that kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee and drank it in absolute silence, and felt something return to me that I hadn't realized was gone, something that had been missing since Gerald died, and possibly since long before that. It felt like being a person again. I did not contact Philip for 2 months. That was deliberate. I needed the distance, and I think, looking back, I needed him to sit with what he had done long enough that it could not be rationalized away. He called me 12 times in the first 3 weeks. I let them go to voicemail. His messages went from confused to worried to apologetic in a progression that told me he was working through something, and I let him work through it without my help, because it was his work to do, not mine. When I finally called him back, I was sitting in my kitchen with the morning light coming through the window and a second cup of coffee cooling on the table. "Mom," he said, and the way he said it, 2 letters, 1 syllable, told me everything about what those 2 months had cost him. "I need to say some things," I told him, "and I need you to just listen. Can you do that?" He could. I told him that I loved him in a way that had no conditions on it, and that would never change. I told him that what he did with my money was a betrayal, regardless of his intentions, and that I needed him to acknowledge it plainly, without qualifications. I told him that his silence in that house, every time Renee spoke to me as though I were an inconvenience, every time he turned up to television and pretended not to hear, was its own kind of abandonment, and I needed him to understand that too. He cried. My 53-year-old son cried on the phone, and I let him, and I did not soften what I had said to make it easier for him. But I also said this: I am not going anywhere. I am your mother. Oliver is my grandson, and I intend to be in his life. And I am willing to figure out what that looks like if you are willing to do the real work of figuring it out. He said he was. Whether Renee was willing was a separate conversation, and a longer one, and not mine to tell. What I will say is that it happened slowly, over the following year, in the way that real things change, not in one transformative moment, but in small recalibrations, missed opportunities for cruelty that went unmissed, a gradual recognition, perhaps, that the power she had exercised over me in that house was built on a condition that no longer existed. I was not dependent on them anymore. I never needed to be dependent on them again. Oliver turned 4 that spring. I drove to Columbus for his birthday party, and when I walked in, he shrieked, "Grandma Bear," and launched himself at me with the full-body commitment that only 4-year-olds can manage. And I caught him and held him and pressed my face into his hair and let myself feel exactly how much I had missed him. Renee was in the kitchen cutting the cake. She looked up when I came in. We looked at each other for a moment. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for having me," I said. It was not warmth, but it was not war either. And at 68 years old, I've learned that sometimes that is enough to start with. Mr. Barrett Patton, in one of our follow-up conversations, mentioned offhandedly that the joint account Philip and I had shared, the one my $128,000 had flowed through, was still technically a joint account, and that the transactions from it were legally recoverable as unauthorized withdrawals, given that I had established in writing that the funds were mine. He said this gently as a matter of information, not as a recommendation. I thought about it for a long time. Eventually, I told Philip about it, not as a threat, as information, the same way Mr. Patton had given it to me. I told him I was not planning to pursue legal action. I told him I wanted him to repay me over time, at whatever pace was realistic, and that I would not charge interest, but that I did want a written agreement. We signed a promissory note in Mr. Patton's office on a Thursday in February. Philip and I shook hands across the conference room table like two adults who were also, still, a mother and her son. He has made every payment since. I think about that Tuesday in October sometimes. The laundry on the floor, my empty hands, the sound of the television from the living room. I think about the woman sitting on the park bench with 4 bags and $1,400 and 12 days until her next pension check, watching a man walk a golden retriever and thinking about a hand on her arm in the dark. What I want to say to her, what I would say to any woman who is sitting somewhere like that right now, is this: you are not finished. Whatever has been taken from you, whatever you gave away without understanding what you were giving, whatever silence you tolerated for the sake of peace, none of that has finished you. You are not dependent until you have no other options, and you almost certainly have options you have not looked at yet. My duplex in Dayton is still rented, both units. The young couple on one side just had a baby girl, and the older gentleman on the other side grew tomatoes in pots on his porch last summer and left a bag of them outside my property manager's office. I never met him in person, but I liked him immediately when she told me that. My apartment on Quatman Avenue has a kitchen with a window that catches the morning light. My grandson calls me Grandma Bear. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. I've been thinking lately about cause and effect, not the philosophical kind you read about in books, the plain, unglamorous kind that shows up in real life, in kitchens and hallways and park benches on cold October mornings. Renee did not become the way she was by accident. People who feel entitled to cruelty have usually been allowed to practice it for a long time, in small ways, before anyone noticed. And Philip did not fail me in a single moment. He had been making that choice, the choice to look away, for years before I ever moved into that house. What happened to me wasn't random. It was the result of a chain of small permissions, small silences, small surrenders, including my own. I think about the money. I handed over $150,000 because I believed that love and proximity were the same thing. I believed that buying myself a place near my son was the same as being wanted there. It was not. And their amount of love, mine for him, his for me, whatever complicated version of love Philip was capable of in those years, changed the fact that I'd made a financial decision based on an emotional hope. That gap between the two is where I lost everything, temporarily. But here is the thing about losing everything temporarily. It teaches you what was real. What was real was that I had spent 41 years being capable and intelligent, and then handed the wheel to someone else because it was easier. Gerald managed the money. I managed the household. It worked until it didn't. And when it stopped working, I discovered that capability without knowledge is just potential sitting in a locked room. I had the ability to manage my own life. I had simply never been required to find the key. Oliver, when he climbed into my lap and put his head on my shoulder, did not do that because I owned a duplex in Dayton. He did it because of something that cannot be taken out of a joint account. That is worth knowing. That distinction between what you are and what you have becomes very clear when you are sitting on a park bench with 4 bags and no plan. What I did after that bench was not remarkable. I called a friend. I called a lawyer. I asked questions I should have asked 2 years earlier. These are ordinary actions. The only thing that made them matter was that I took them instead of waiting for someone else to take them for me. Siflik is paying me back faithfully every month. I don't think he does it out of guilt anymore. I think he does it because signing the promissory note was the first honest transaction we had conducted in years. And honesty, once you've tasted it again, is hard to give up. Renee said, "Thank you for coming at Oliver's birthday party." I said, "Thank you for having me." Neither of us meant it fully. Both of us meant it a little. That is how things actually change between people. Not in transformations, but in fractions, in the slow accumulation of moments where you choose the slightly better thing. I don't need warmth from her. I need access to my grandson, and I have that now, on my own terms, from my own apartment, in my own life. That is what I would tell anyone sitting on any bench, in any city, with whatever version of 4 bags and not enough money. The next right step is almost always smaller than you think it is. It is a phone call. It is a question you haven't asked yet. It is the decision to stop waiting for someone else to rescue a situation that only you can rescue. You built a life once. You can build another one. And the second one, I promise you, will fit better.